If you had a time machine, where would you go? Or if you could be a star, which one would you be? These are the idle questions we sometimes ask ourselves, but I think being a modern star is really quite common. After all, anyone could become one these days. I want to be a real star. Someone whose light shines on for hundreds of years. Someone whose life and work encapsulates all the glamour of the human condition from the gutter to the gods. He must be scandalous and tragic. He must be brilliant and tortured. Above all, my heart must stop beating when he comes into the room. Who else? But Lord Byron.
Byron was the first modern sex symbol. This sensual adventurer travelled from his ancestral home on a voyage where his life and art became one, igniting unprecedented fame and infamy. I want to discover how the extreme experiences of his journey turned an obscure poet into a best-selling phenomenon and the original anti-hero.
On his exotic adventures, Byron travelled with an entourage and 17 cabin trucks. I'm travelling light, following him across Europe to the Orient.
Via Portuguese hookers, Albanian bandit country, and Italian royalty. Seeking out Byron's marbled halls of sodomy and sherbet, abusing embassy hospitality, and like him, ending up at the VD clinic.
Byron was Britain's most successful poet and really her first international celebrity. With the vanity and the sexual appetites of a modern rock star, even those who adored him were forced to admit that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know.
In the summer of 1809, Lord Byron set sail on an extraordinary boy's own adventure. Accompanied by 4 servants and a friend from Cambridge, the 22-year-old was hungry for excitement and exoticism. Byron was funding the entire 2-year expedition, mostly with borrowed money. But that didn't stop him from commissioning this flamboyant portrait of himself to commemorate his departure. This was no ordinary grand tour. Europe was in the grip of the Napoleonic Wars and few dared travel. But Byron wanted to go to the edge, to discover himself, while tasting every danger and delight. Unable to disembark in war-torn France, Byron landed in the louche southern city of Lisbon, famed for its bars and bordellos.
Well, one can only imagine this whole group of English people, a very eccentric group, a kind of swishy aristocrat with his village family retainers, all trying to get the baggage together, all kind of raising their eyebrows at Milord, kind of, you know, flouncing around. It must have been very festive and really fun. Oh.
Byron was no innocent abroad. He'd already lost his virginity to his nanny at the age of 9. And greedily experimented with actresses, servant girls, multiple prostitutes, and even a 17-year-old choir boy. He was now ready to taste the forbidden fruits of other lands.
There's a smell of kind of fish, and there's only 2 things that taste like fish, and one of them's fish. So, you wait and see.
Byron and his Cambridge friend John Hobhouse hit the stews of Lisbon, and Byron immediately fell for the charms of Hispanic women. As he wrote, "They are formed for all the witching arts of love." Perhaps I should sample those witching arts for myself. Some things never change.
Hi, Elena. How are you?
Elena is a high-class call girl, and she's met a fair few Englishmen coming here in Byron's footsteps to experience the most intimate kind of Latin hospitality.
Byron said about Spanish women that they were very well formed in the witching arts of love. And I suppose they were much more sophisticated and earthy than English girls, probably.
Yeah, I do think so, because we have open mind in bed.
Yes.
And we allow the men do what else they want.
Right.
if it's good for us, of course.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Have you had much experience with English guys?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Oh.
Lots of experience.
Really?
Yeah.
And what are English guys like in bed? But
Just-
compared to, for example, Germans?
Oh, yeah. Englishmen are more careful.
Quicker?
Yes. No, they are very kind with me.
Really?
Yeah.
We have a reputation for not being... I think we got better recently, actually.
Yeah.
But we used to have a reputation of being people who kind of had a grope in the back of a taxi and
Yeah.
also premature ejaculation.
Yeah.
But not
with me.
Not in your experience.
No.
Well, that's very good. Who has the biggest penises?
I don't know. I think Brazilian ones.
Brazilians
Yeah.
always have good ones. Yeah. High five.
Byron picked his way through the streets of Lisbon, avoiding soldiers and the odd cuckolded husband. This impressive brooding figure, blessed with a member by some accounts of Brazilian proportion, could have almost any woman he pleased. Yet he hid from them the deformed leg he'd had since birth. Our British lord abroad was most definitely not all he seemed. Posh but penniless, his father had effectively deserted him and his stocky neurotic mother, leaving them with a crumbling estate and mounting debts. He was a mass of contradictions, with his nose in the gutter and his head in the stars. Byron's sights were set much further east. After Spain and Malta, where he had affairs with married women and collected locks of their hair, he headed to the wildest country in the Western world. It was a blank space on the map that few Englishmen had ever visited. Byron called it Terra Incognita. Its real name, Albania. This violent and forbidding land was to have a remarkable effect on Byron. It would inspire the poem that would change his life. Here, finally in Albania, Byron was lost to his own world.
And so am I. This is one of the last unknown spots in Europe, and I'm planning to live dangerously. The church bells of Cambridge must never have seemed further away.
The two friends must have had their hearts in their mouths as they climbed these treacherous hills.
No nation are so detested, said Byron, and dreaded by their neighbours than the Albanese. Their habits are predatory, all are armed.
Albania was ruled by the most bloodthirsty despot in Europe, the ferocious Ali Pasha, not known for his kindness to strangers. Byron was determined to meet him, not least because of Ali Pasha's spirited resistance to his Ottoman overlords. The two boys embarked on a hazardous journey into the heart of bandit country. Remarkably, the brutal warlord sent soldiers to escort them. Byron was thrilled. Sadly, I've just got my guide and Byron expert, Auron, and a couple of donkey bashers.
More or less 200 years ago, today, Byron was coming down this actual road. One of the things Byron liked here was the very bonded male society. I think he very much appreciated that, and actually even wrote about, rather nastily, about the women, saying that since the weather was so nice, it was quite a good job that they were out building the roads and labouring. And I guess he was asserting himself in a way as a man as well, because remember, he had a crippled foot and he was kind of effeminate in a way.
And I think those guys kind of embraced him in a way.
Yeah.
They didn't judge him who he was or anything like that. It just kind of, you know, was part of them.
As Byron travelled to Pasha's castle, surrounded by his band of soldiers, something clicked. He was at the centre of an extraordinary unfolding story. Much of the detail of his journey so far was too scandalous for diary form, so he semi-fictionalized it in the most celebrated travel blog in the history of the English language, as a poem about a boy called not Byron, but Harold.
He left the primal city of the land and onwards did his further journey take to greet Albania's chief, whose dread command is lawless law, for with a bloody hand he sways a nation, turbulent and bold. Da, da. What do you think? It's good stuff.
Matching Byron's lust for life was his power to describe it in every lurid detail. Childe Harold's pilgrimage would enthrall everyone who could read in Regency England and make him as famous as the prince. Byron reinvented himself as that very modern kind of celebrity, someone whose art and life are one. He didn't travel just to see, but to be seen. He had himself painted in this splendid Albanian costume. 2 centuries on, and I'm expected to model a distinctly tacky copy.
I'll put this on first.
Yes.
This feels pretty sissy.
Putting it on made me wonder, where did the real Byron end and the poseur begin? Like the smartest of stars, he was too playful, too ironic to ever let you know.
No one could have chosen a more stupid headdress if they tried. I feel like my mother going out to a village hall meeting of the village council. She loves red and gold and a nice white skirt. Byron, I don't really feel like. I feel like a whirling dervish? No. And this is what it was meant to look like. The thing that's interesting, I think, about Byron here is how self-aware he was, how aware he was of building his own image up, rather like David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust or something, this Childe Harold, who was going to be painted, etched, he was going to appear in lithographs, and this young boy, incredibly arrogant at this point, very into himself. He knew exactly, in terms of career, where he was going to go, I think, and that's quite extraordinary. So, I'd love to get out of this costume ASAP. It makes you feel a bit of a twat sometimes. I mean, I feel like a twat most of the time anyway, but...
Byron's flamboyant nature was about to meet its match. The warlord Ali Pasha's taste for pretty young men was well known. When he did finally meet the young English lord, he liked what he saw. As Byron wrote to his mother, Pasha remarked on "my small ears, curling hair, and little white hands," and expressed himself pleased with my appearance and garb. He sent me almonds and sugared sherbet 20 times a day, even asking for me at night when he was more at leisure. Byron was more than just flattered by the warlord's advances. He might have enjoyed shagging women, but I don't think he was particularly interested in them. He even claimed they didn't have souls. So the sheer power behind Ali Pasha's embrace must have made his hair stand up on end, if nothing else.
What was Ali Pasha's position with women? Everyone says that he was a screaming old queen, basically.
Yeah, he's an interesting character.
What do they think in Albania if I was to say on national television that he had an affair with Byron, for example? Would I be... would I be put into the pillory?
Not at all. I mean, I think it did.
Oh, really? Tell me.
Well, from what little we know, I mean, there's some kind of hints that they might have something.
When Byron finally reached Ali Pasha's fabulous castle, he found a wealth of dramatic material for his alter ego that would shock and thrill his audience.
Now, this is one of the entrance to the castle.
Right.
But obviously this is not what the castle used to look. I mean, there is a great description of Byron when you walk in with the imam praying and the
drums beating,
the horses
eunuchs,
around.
Greeks,
Yep.
Nubians,
It's a great description that he
Tartars.
In daring to make this pilgrimage, Byron wasn't only collecting raw data for his epic travelogue Childe Harold, but setting the tone for the rest of his life. Impetuous, reckless, amoral, he lived for the moment.
And this is the gate I believe they walked in.
Oh, a lot of rubbish.
It's very sad the way it is, but this is the entrance where they came. And you can see the view. You can see for miles here.
And you can just hear the cattle bells.
Oh yeah, easy.
So you could hear people coming probably from miles off up here. This castle feels like it really is kind of Hollywood does the Orient. Well, you always see it endlessly in Hollywood, huge painted castles on the tops of rocks, and English travellers kind of going up with a mule up the hill, knocking on the boom, boom, boom door and opening, and you see this kind of orgy of Nubian slaves and eunuchs and Greek soldiers and Tartars, all the things that are in here, and drums going boom, 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 boom. And it really is like that in a way. And this huge, mammoth, bisexual man with long fingers covered in jewels, fingering our poor Lord Byron. It's all very exciting.
Lord Byron was soon to become the first real celebrity. And it was in Albania that the mutual adoration needed between a star and his audience first blossomed. Word is out that I'm doing a film about him, so I've been invited onto Albania's biggest talk show. Byron championed Albania in his poetry, and remarkably, he's still a national hero here. I've got to be on this Albanian chat show for 2 whole hours. That's spreading even me a little bit thin. I'm going to kill my bloody director when I get my hands on him. However, like Byron, I'm going to put my best withered foot forward.
The strange thing is, in Albania, people seem to know Byron much better than they do in England. But it was really actually only coming here, in a way, to Albania, where I started to discover really what Byron meant in the 19th century to the rest of the world.
Byron was a flirt and a gossip. He detested mealy-mouthed diplomacy, an attitude that I've learned can have a price.
Madonna, ne kemi dhe fotografinë që mund ta shfaqim ndërkohë në ekran dhe në një moment në libër thoni që djersin sex appeal.
She sweats sex appeal. No, I said she sweats.
She sweats.
Jo, kam thënë thjesht që djersin, jo djersin sex appeal.
Byron made the Albanian warlord Ali Pasha famous in the West with his flattering portrayal of this brutal yet noble revolutionary and his fight for Albanian independence. And the Albanians returned the favor. Byron is immortalized across the land.
What it says is the famous quote about savage nurse to a rugged man. No, rugged nurse to a savage man. Hi. Can one of these children please read this to me?
The Albanians, cut off from the West for decades, have an extraordinary appetite for poetry. Everyone seems to have heard of Byron.
What does that mean then?
Albania, let me bend my eyes on thee, you rugged nurse of savage man.
All right. What is this place called?
Lord Byron.
Oh, this is Sheshi. Oh, square, Sheshi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sheshi Lord Byron. Okay. And where's the Socialist Communist Party headquarters? Where?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I want to start a revolution to become communist in Albania again. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah? No? No?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't then. Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.
Lord Byron had found himself in Albania. His passion and pansexuality that had been so at odds with Regency England had been fired here. Surrounded by the 50 soldiers that Ali Pasha had assigned to him, the English lord and his poetic alter ego were in their element. But as the flames along their faces gleamed, their gestures nimble, dark eyes flashing free, the long wild locks that to their girdles streamed, while thus in concert they half sang, half screamed. As Byron prepared to continue his journey, he was empowered and emboldened.
Doors kept opening with new possibilities, and all these new possibilities were absolutely like stars coming into line. He'd felt this sexual ambiguity in himself. He'd realized it wasn't accepted in the milieu that he came from, in the country that he came from. And on his travels, he suddenly discovered that all the things he was feeling, other people were feeling. Not only other people, but the most powerful people around. The butcher's warlord actually was fancying him. I think it gave him this life's destiny of pushing and pushing and pushing. And Tennessee Williams, when he writes about Lord Byron in the kind of acid trip play Camino Real, Byron's last line as he leaves Camino Real is, "Make journeys, attempt them, there's nothing else."
Constantinople, spanning the Bosphorus, centre of the Ottoman Empire. Arriving here, Byron wrote in Childe Harold, "Nor oft I've seen such sight, nor heard such song, as wooed the eye and thrilled the Bosphorus along." But he was always irreverent.
He said the difference between the British or the English and the Turkish were that the vices in fashion in England were whoring and drinking, whereas in Turkey they were sodomy and sherbet. So I'm rather looking forward to a bit of sodomy and sherbet myself while I'm here. Sorry, Granny, sorry, Mum.
Byron had avoided the predictability of standard grand tour destinations in favour of the more exotic. He discovered the imaginative possibilities of Turkey by going well off the beaten track.
I think this must be some kind of catalogue of what, first of all, is available in Constantinople. Byron and Hobhouse went to these kind of bars/pubs where boy dancers did beastly things, according to Hobhouse's descriptions, and he called them buggery shops. And they did kind of basic lap dances for guys, and then guys would take them off and fuck them. Here's one with the kind of Liberty at the Barricades hat. Or Father Christmas. Ooh, and a tattoo. I don't know whether he's been waxing, but he's got a little kind of bit of hair down the middle only, and one ball. Seems to be Turkish tradition.
For this beastly sight, we paid 55 piastres, 5 to the boys each, and 5 to all the fiddlers.
Half-mast.
Byron excitedly described the hammams as a marble paradise of sherbet and sodomy.
Oh, prisoner. Naked prisoner with a hard-on. You see, you can have fun in prison even in Ottoman Turkey. This is stories about various bathhouse boys, and they really are quite extraordinary. Here's a good one. Hamleki Ibrahim was once a young soldier of the Sultan's bodyguard division. He lies uncovered in bed or on the white marble floor of the halved. He never cares if the penis is too long or too big, but takes it in with the power of his youth without any complaint. He goes on all night until the sun rises without charge and becomes your fellow lover in bed. This much loyalty is more than you would expect from a naked bath masser. His nightly cost was 450 silver coins. To get the utmost enjoyment out of these nightly visits, he never hesitates to lie under his host and to entertain him with his arsehole. He's a passionate and valorous man. I mean it. So there you go.
It wasn't just the sex lives of the Ottoman Empire that fascinated Byron, but its power and politics.
Britannia.
He looked on Turkey's Sultan as the ruler of a vast, oppressive empire. But that didn't stop him from using his title to gain an introduction. Like him, I've wangled an invitation to stay at the British Embassy.
I sometimes thought I should have been an ambassador. I could have been an ambassador. I'd have been very good, very regal, or vice-regal at least. Good afternoon.
This building is on the same site as the embassy that Byron visited in 1810. It's now the Consulate General. And our man in Istanbul is called Jessica, and she's rather wonderful.
Let's go up the grand staircase.
My God, this is quite grand. Oh, here's a nice bit of furniture.
You like that? I thought you'd like that. We have our visitors book. Would you sign it for us, please?
Sign it, yes. Now then. I have a feeling somebody's watching me. Oh, it's Her Majesty, in very good shape. Fine-looking woman. She does look marvellous, but she's quite well hung, isn't she? I mean, not well. What do you say? Stacked. Good for her. Thank you, Your Majesty, for having me.
That's why you'll never make it into the diplomatic service.
No, because if I'd gone into the diplomatic, I wouldn't be like this now.
Right, this is our room. And then we've got 2 guest rooms up here. One that doesn't have a bathroom, one that does have a bathroom, that is yours.
Good, okay, see you all later. Bye, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Cup of tea, please, someone. And a couple of belly dancers. Oh, Jessica, you are naughty. You haven't had the window cleaners in before the party.
Byron behaved rather bizarrely in Turkey, dressing up in strange costumes and generally ruffling local British feathers with his extreme mood swings. He found the Turks honest, but was appalled by their brutality and the sight of human heads on stakes. However, the timing of his visit couldn't have been better. The ambassador was about to have his farewell audience with the fearsome Sultan, and Byron got himself invited along.
Byron arrived in full kind of military regalia, not that he was ever in a regiment,
Superb.
with epaulettes and an extraordinary hat with feathers, only to discover that protocol in Turkey meant that even though he was a lord, he had to go behind this man called Canning, who was an ordinary person, and he had the most amazing hissy fit and stormed off. Anyway, he was obsessed by his position at this point.
So did he ever actually stay in the house, or
I
did
think
he just
stayed
visit?
for 2 or 3 nights at first.
Excellent. So you really are treading in the footsteps.
Absolutely.
Excellent. But you're not going to do the bizarre uniform and...
Not tonight, no.
Please.
Versace all the way for me.
Excellent.
I think I'm going to have a bubble bath now. I've always longed to do a striptease at an embassy. Okay, that's enough.
"200 years ago, more or less now, Byron would have been spending his first night in the embassy. I wonder what he was thinking about it all. He was such a conflicted character at this stage. It's hard to follow all the mood swings he goes through, from ecstasy to irritation. Again, Byron's charm and his rudeness are fascinating. You know, irresistibly charming and incredibly rude. So enemies and incredibly loyal friends only, nothing in the middle. Just the way we like it, really.
In Byron's day, the diplomatic issues were burning hot, and he was fascinated by them. Tonight, the biggies are all here. I think I'll see what I can do to help.
When Margaret Thatcher came here a few years back, she did something very funny. She quoted Lord Byron, saying there is no difference between the Turks and the English. And then some journalist looked up in Byron to see what the end of the quote was, and the quote actually was, "The fashions and vices are that the English love whoring and drinking, and the Turks love sodomy and sherbet." So she put her foot in it.
Well, I mean...
They don't like that anymore, it seems. Of course, he was quite enlightening in a way about Ottoman sexuality as well. He said that the only difference between the English and the Turks are the English like whoring and drinking, and the Turks like sherbet and sodomy.
Wow.
This is something that he said?
Yes. So it's, you know, quite amusing.
I'm not sure that Byron was quite as inept as but he did eventually get to meet the Sultan. It made little impression on him. Still, he saw straight through the Western cliché of the Turk as a base, unthinking heathen, and was impressed by Islamic science, education, and apparent honesty. But in the end, there was little here to fire his spirits, and within 4 days of meeting the Sultan, he moved on. The Hellespont, the entrance from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, and the junction of Europe with Asia, certainly did fire Byron's imagination. Maybe because he had a withered leg, he kept wanting to prove himself physically, fencing, boxing, and above all, swimming. Here he staged one of his most memorable feats, swimming from one continent to the other.
I've been forced against my will to swim this Hellespont later on today. So, yeah, I am a bit worried about being run over by a cargo ship or drowning in the wake. But it's better than dying during a facelift, I suppose.
Byron had a deep need to prove his manly prowess. And he wrote that the feat of swimming between Asia and Europe here at the Hellespont meant more to him than any kind of glory. It's a lot longer and more hazardous than it looks, so I'm getting some local help.
As you can see from the arrows, that's our point of travel. It's 2 miles.
Why can't we go quicker in that bit?
There's boat traffic in Kansas. We're going to perform a swimming from north to south.
Wow, it's a long way. And these are the two boys who are going to be swimming with me?
Arkadaşlar benimle yüzecek.
What's your name?
Dennis.
Dennis? And what's your name? Rupert.
Ben de Rupert'ım.
Hope you don't have to stop me from drowning.
Byron swam the Hellespont following in the wake of the mythological figure Leander, who did the same to demonstrate his romantic love of the priestess Hero. Byron was very consciously echoing classical romance, but he also loved the sea for its own sake, saying, "I delight in it, and come out with a buoyancy of spirits I never feel on any other occasion." My hopes of being liberated by the same experience were cruelly dashed. Forced to stop for each Russian tanker that crossed our path, we made it more than halfway across before we finally had to give up.
Byron was very courageous in one sense. He'd somehow decided to be a cripple and to be sexy. And, you know, that takes a lot of courage and spunk, for want of a better word. Byron wrote this after crossing the Hellespont. "For me, degenerate modern wretch, though in the genial month of May, my dripping limbs I faintly stretch and think I've done a feat today." Sweet.
Degenerate modern wretch. Was that Byron's view of himself? 2 days after swimming the Hellespont, he wrote to a friend, "I'm tolerably sick of vice, which I have tried in its agreeable varieties, and mean on my return to cut all dissolute acquaintance, leave off wine and carnal company, and betake myself to politics and decorum." Right. In Turkey, he had seen another bloated empire hell-bent on dominating and suppressing any weak nation within its reach. Byron always loved an underdog, none more passionately than the Ottoman-occupied country he was now heading for, his beloved Greece.
Of course, the most exciting thing about a journey is the idea one has of its destination. Even if you never arrive at the destination, even if the destination, as in Byron's case, almost inevitably pisses you off. But here, the idea of arriving in Athens, the center of ancient Greece, must have been like stepping into an acid trip.
The ancient Greece that Byron knew and admired from school, and whose literature influenced his poetry, was in ruins, and his countrymen were scavenging the remains. He picked a very public fight with Lord Elgin for carrying off large chunks of antiquity back to England. But the larger damage he saw here set him on a crusade that would shape the rest of his life.
Byron made a connection between these ruins and what he saw as this incredible Greek submissiveness to hundreds of years of Ottoman rule. Well, the Greek people were ruined, and so he connected the two of them. And again, this for him was a seed that was going to grow and grow and grow over the next years. I think everything came into focus for Byron in this first 10-week trip to Athens. He suddenly saw that poetry can in fact be the bellows of revolution. It can fan the flames, and he saw it as another potential
way that he could express himself, because he was becoming more and more of an outsider every step he made.
And of course, Childe Harold, Byron's idealized version of himself, took up the cause.
Fair Greece, sad relic of departed worth, immortal though no more, though fallen great. Who now shall lead thy scattered children forth, and long accustomed bondage uncreate? This was a verse, a copy of which, well, the original, I think, is in some university in America. And in answer to all these questions, who now shall lead thy scattered children forth, Byron wrote Byron. And long accustomed bondage uncreate. And then he wrote underneath that Byron. So already he was seeing himself, as usual, center stage, leading Greece into the promised land.
Byron fell for all things Greek. Their sensibilities chimed with his, and when he and Hobhouse found themselves watching an erotic puppet show in an Athens cafe, Hobhouse professed loftily that nothing could be more beastly. But I'm sure Byron loved it.
Έλα και η σειρά σου τώρα, έλα, ετοιμάσου. Νάτα, νάτα, νάτα. Όπα, πά να φύγω εσύ. Σιγά ρε παιδί μου, σιγά θα μου τον δαγκώσεις. Πω, τι έπαθα. Έλα, τι να τον κάνω τώρα. Εγώ είμαι το τζίνι. Τώρα θα τον πάρω και θα στον βάλω από πίσω. Αχ, πώς την πάτησα έτσι ο καημένος. Τέλος πάντων.
Byron's sexual appetites were omnivorous. One of his worst poems, The Maid of Athens, is said to be inspired by his love for a 13-year-old girl. But actually, his interest in Athenian youth seemed to lie with a boy. Niccolo Giraud, a beautiful 17-year-old, became language tutor and traveling companion to Byron. They stayed together in this monastery.
On a trip with Niccolo, they passed through here, and in a letter to Hobhouse, he said he achieved at least 200 times coitum plenum et optabilem with Niccolo Giraud. This phrase, plen et optabil -coit, was the code word, or the code phrase, among this group of Cambridge aesthetes, these puffs really, this little puffy posse, Methodists they called each other, or citoyenne, and it was their code word. It was dangerous to write about these things in those days. It was, you know, terrible things happened in England. You can read about people who discovered having sex with other men, being put in the pillory. They often died in the pillory. Crowds of thousands came to hurl things at them. Shit, dead cats, everything. It was a very, very dangerous game in England to be a puff. So they had to be very careful how they wrote about it.
There can be no doubt that he not only had sex with Niccolo, but also that, insofar as Byron ever did, he fell in love with him. And in his original will, he left him £7,000. An enormous amount of money then, by any standards.
Well, I can't think of a nicer place for full intercourse to take place, really. It must have been lovely.
It's difficult to work out the real Byron at this stage. The revolutionary hero in waiting, the lover of men and women, the poet creating a whole new world with himself at its center, the public figure or the private man. One thing is for certain, he was one of the earliest practitioners of modern PR.
Well, this is an example of the earliest studio publicity still, I think. Having seen it in photographs, it's lovely to see it up close and personal. This is the Albanian outfit that I myself have worn the felt version of. A lot of people who painted him noted that while he was talking, he was one character, and then he'd put on this kind of moody, petulant face, which he thought was his public face, and people would say to him, why can't you just be natural? And he'd say, this is natural. We actors do this all the time as well. So he really is such an actor, I think. Like beautiful lips. But he knew exactly what he was doing. And in one sense, in another sense, this image is the image that's remained with us right until now. And certainly in terms of, I think, his English reputation, the English has never managed really to go any further than this image and the idea that he put forward of himself in Childe Harold. And actually, it's very clever, but in a way, if he was interested in posterity, he's been hoisted by his own petard slightly.
Do you like him?
Oh, I adore him, yeah. He's hysterical. I mean, he's a really funny old thing. He's mad. Byron was all charm when he wanted to be, and utterly vile at other points. Remind you of anyone you know?
After 2 years abroad, Byron headed home with a time bomb, the manuscript of Childe Harold. This epic travelogue, suffused with sex, adventure, and danger, would have a bigger impact on English readers than any poem that had ever been published.
Facing him on the horizon was fame that he wouldn't have imagined happening, because it was just bigger than I think anyone's fame had been up to that point. It was a major international stardom, one of the first. And Scandal.
Scandal that was going to overwhelm him. After 2 years of travel, in 1811 Byron returned to London. He went straight to his publisher John Murray in Mayfair to deliver the manuscript of his semi-autobiographical poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. At 24, his life was about to be transformed.
Come up, anyhow. There's the old boy, on his plinth.
John Murray's direct descendant, John Murray VII, still runs the place.
Yehudi Menuhin's wife came and with very red lipstick kissed him, and I wanted the lovely lips to remain on him, but my father insisted that it was taken off. But we've had lots of ladies who come and kiss him. Anyhow, this is the where Byron and Murray and Walter Scott and everybody met in this room, and the portrait by Phillips went up while Byron was still alive.
Right.
And people come from all over the world to see it.
What Byron had brought back with him was to turn John Murray's establishment into the hottest literary salon in London.
It was said that when Childe Harold was published, Byron woke up to find himself famous and Murray to find himself a gentleman.
Yeah, anyway, but how successful was it?
Oh, tremendously successful. The 500 original printing was sold out in 3 days, and then the sales just skyrocketed. England had been faced by the Napoleonic Wars. The Battle of Waterloo was still 3 years ahead. People hadn't travelled very much. Here was someone who came back with these extraordinary stories of the East and the stories of conquests.
Yes, no, what do you think happened to Byron after the publication of Childe Harold?
Everybody wanted him. All society were inviting him. All the girls were after him. You know, it must have been an absolutely appalling period. But, of course, he enjoyed it to begin with, and he lived it up. Whenever he went to Drury Lane, everybody would say, that's Byron. Practically everybody had read the book, because they could in those days. You know, the society wasn't that large, and the women just were like moths to a light. Mm. I mean, I have to say, there's a wonderful letter that he writes to my ancestor, which says that last night I had Angelina, the daughter of my physician, and a married woman. Now, he loved explaining that people were married who he was having it off with, you know. And so he grew into this image that they got, I think, from Childe Harold.
Now, do you have a bit of the Childe Harold?
Well, I'll show you an interesting thing, yes. Here's the first 2 cantos, the manuscript of Childe Harold. And if we look here, you'll see what's very interesting is that in the first canto, you see it says Childe Byron,
Byron.
And he crosses out Byron and he puts Harold, which is the evidence that obviously it is fairly autobiographical. And that's really why he caught the imagination. They saw some of the things that happen in here, they see as him as being the person. And therefore he was very naughty, he was wicked, and people loved wicked people.
And what about, do you have any of the hair collection? Young ladies' pubic hair?
We haven't got, no, the pubic hair evidently was burnt by one of my ancestors, but I'm not sure. We had a gathering here of the Murray staff once, and not so long ago, and we put out the hair, and I said, now, here's Byron's girlfriend's pubic hair, and one of the girls came forward and said, "Nonsense, pubic hair is much coarser." Well, I don't know about that, but anyhow...
Not if you're Japanese.
But I'll show you. But now, wait.
It's like a curtain.
Here is one of the most moving bits, which was mounted because it was at an exhibition.
Hair of Donna Josefa, Spanish lady.
This always amazes people that you're allowed to do this. But this is... Now, what you say to that? But the trouble was that Byron actually fell in love with her sister. And I think that when she discovered this, she cut off her hair, and this was it, this wonderful lock, and sent it to Byron and went into a nunnery.
She must have been quite unbalanced, because they only could have met for 2 or 3 days.
Well, they were all very unbalanced when Byron was around.
Right.
So now, Byron was famous. Everyone wanted a piece. The invitations piled up, and Byron chose tonight's lucky hostess, with his famous underlook, prepared to make the Jane Austen posh totties swoon, and all the Mr. Darcys wet with jealousy. An inconsequential and crippled country squire without funds had made it right into the very heart of the empire. And for a brief moment, London society and Byron enjoyed a kind of dangerous honeymoon.
This was a new kind of fame. Byron was mobbed everywhere he went. Society ladies rushed to give him patronage, and in one case it was rumoured that he repaid one of these women by trying to sleep with her 13-year-old daughter. When a torrid affair with Lady Caroline Lamb, the first real groupie, began to cool, she turned into a crazed stalker. Byron never chased women, they chased him. Now they besieged him, and he even pleaded with his publisher to protect him from their advances. The modern celebrity culture was born.
Fame blinded Byron, but unfortunately he was not above the law. Insanity, alcoholism, and maybe even a spot of sodomy were perfectly acceptable on their own. But add incest to the menu, and society slammed the door.
In the next stage of my journey, I'm going to find a man transformed, diving to the depths of pussy-hungry depravity, soaring to the heights of national heroism before a tragic, climactic end.
I'll be following Byron into exile for sex, drugs, and revolution.
Well, from the makers of Secret Millionaire, a privileged and an impoverished family share a life-changing experience in how the other half live. Brand new to 4 this Thursday at 9. Next, though, who's in love with Noreen now, and why is Marcus throwing a tantrum? It's all hitting the fan in Big Brother.
Lord Byron. At the height of his fame, scandal would drive him into exile and lasting infamy.
He, of course, wanted one last adventure with which to propel himself into posterity.
Follow Rupert Everett as he relives the scandalous adventures of Lord Byron. Next month.
In the spring of 1812, London suddenly discovered its first great superstar. A 24-year-old poet, Lord Byron. His name was synonymous with danger and seduction, beauty and mystery. Every society hostess now wanted Lord Byron at their party. I've been tracing the footsteps of the man who thrilled and scandalized Regency London. Byron's first great foreign adventure was driven by a lust for life and an omnivorous sexual appetite. I followed his journey, meeting Portuguese ladies of the night, wild men of Albania, to Turkey, the land of sodomy and sherbet, before discovering revolutionary fervor in Greece and sowing the seeds for the tragic early finale of his life. Byron had returned to London with Childe Harold, the steamy, semi-autobiographical poem about his travels. It was an unprecedented publishing sensation. Overnight, he became indelibly famous, and the cult of celebrity was born.
But fame was a poisonous flower. It
deadly nightshade, it bloated an already enlarged ego. Its poetic perfume was soon overpowered by the stench of raw scandal, as Byron's whole life was about to be held up for public scrutiny, exposing dark whispers of insanity, alcoholism, sodomy, and incest. Soon, Byron would have to leave town. I'm going to follow his flight from scandal into exile on the strangest and most extraordinary adventure of them all.
My first brush with Byron was something I read by Elizabeth Longford at school when I was 15. She described how one summer's afternoon in 1933, two local vicars set off through a leafy village to an ancient church to exhume the body of Byron. Breathless with excitement, they removed the lid, only to see that Byron's body was almost perfectly preserved. They noted with some surprise that he had an enormous erection of gigantic proportions. This hard-on, which had lasted since 1824 when Byron had died, must surely have been some kind of a record. I was hooked.
Byron's sexuality both drove him and got him into trouble. With his newfound fame, women swooned for him at every turn. But his extravagant lifestyle meant he was always broke. So in September 1812, he proposed to Annabella Milbank, a serious young heiress. To his horror, she turned him down, writing that Byron's lips concealed an inner sneer. But Byron didn't like rejection. He persisted, and a year later, they married. The novelist Edna O'Brien, who knows a thing or two about shocking her readers, has made a recent study of Byron's love life. And in particular, his doomed bid for nuptial bliss.
The wedding itself was not auspicious. They got into a carriage for the honeymoon, and on the way there, Byron vowed that he would punish her for having refused him. So he put terror into her. He was delighted to tell one of his many friends that he had Lady Byron on the sofa before dinner. Well, now we come to the nighttime sleeping arrangements. He said he was used to sleeping alone, but if she wished to sleep next to him, she was as good as any other animal, provided it was young. I mean, that was not very romantic.
I think girls like her being so uneducated about something like sex, and that he having this shock tactic propensity for sodomy. I always imagine, my fantasy is that when they got to the house and he has her on the couch, that he actually just lifts up her dress and has her up the bum. Good hooray girl that she was, she probably enjoyed enormously, laughing like a barrel every time he upended her and slapped her bum and, like, you know, I believe that she gets quite into sex with him and stuff like that.
Yes, she wrote that that they had sex even when she was menstruating, and there was a slight element of boast in it. Her sexual life with him was probably great for her. That was taken away in her mind and subsequently in reality by his love of his half-sister.
Augusta Lee was Byron's half-sister and had secretly shared his bed for at least a year before his marriage. She was now a frequent guest in the marital home. And Byron wrote of their relationship, "I am much afraid that that perverse passion is my deepest." And now pregnant Annabella was obliged to watch hopelessly as the pair of semi-siblings frolicked like children in a fallen paradise downstairs. Annabella gave birth to their daughter, but within weeks, after terrifying rows and undeniable sexual violence, the marriage was over. She denounced him and hinted both at incest and marital sodomy. The Daily Mail du Jour had a field day, comparing him to Nero and Caligula. Friends abandoned him, even jealous ex-lovers joined in, divulging Byron's confidences that he had seduced 3 boys at Harrow and had corrupted his page Rushton.
Cheers, thank you very much.
Strangled by debt, ostracized by society, and in real fear for his safety. For a man as dramatic as Byron, there was only one option: exile.
As soon as he left, I think there was just an enormous weight off his shoulders. He felt free. And that is what travel does to you. It makes you feel free from the burdens of your own life.
On the morning of 25th of April 1816, Lord Byron left England for the continent. He would never see his wife, his daughter, or his sister again. Where others might have felt the weight of shame, Byron smelled freedom, and he was going to enjoy it in style.
Okay, Michael, where's the limousine? Oh my God, it's not that. Here's the thing. Byron had a huge coach made, a copy of Napoleon's own coach. It was green, it had NB for Noel Byron or Napoleon Bonaparte on the side of it. It had a bedroom, it had couches, it had kind of jacuzzis, everything. This is the state of British television.
Byron's London possessions had been seized by bailiffs, but his coach had escaped. He set off in private luxury with baggage and servants in another carriage.
Beluga? There's lots of key words here. Where's the beluga? Is that inside? Maybe it's going to get better inside. Come on, everyone.
Landing in Ostend, Lord Byron fell like a thunderbolt upon a chambermaid. At Waterloo, he picked up souvenirs from the recent battle. While England celebrated a famous victory, Byron, the anti-monarchist, mourned Napoleon's defeat. And from the Rhine, he sent word to London for more condoms.
Buongiorno tutti, benvenuto a bordo. Io mi chiamo Barbara, sono il tour guide.
As Byron's exotic circus caravan rolled through Europe, notoriety preceded him. Announced in local papers, he provoked alarm and fascination in equal measure. Inspired anew, poetry began to pour from him.
I think the genius of Byron was to encapsulate this in words, and the dwarfing of the human ego by nature. And his ego was particularly gigantic and complicated, and he was driving that ego all the time, because part of him was just concentrating on being Byron and being more fabulous and more depressed and more shocking. But on the other side, he had, I think, you know, this genius to sketch in words what he saw. All which expands the spirit, yet appalls, gather around these summits, as to show how earth may pierce to heaven, yet leave vain man below.
Byron was all too human, and when he reached the shores of this mountain lake, he would form another complex web of creative and sexual relationships that would fire the world of literature and bring scandalized accusations of a league of incest. Never one to do anything by halves, Byron rented the impressive Villa Diodati perched over Lake Geneva. Staying nearby that spring was another poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and his wife Mary. The Shelleys had a reputation for indulging in free love. Their endless presence up at the villa turned his new home into a mecca for Byron groupies and thrill seekers.
Really where he came to get away.
Byron scholar Corinne Throsbury has made a meticulous study of Byron's fan mail.
This was a place that Byron came to escape, but in fact, I don't know quite where it was, but the Hotel Angleterre, I guess, was over there, and that's where they rented binoculars to English tourists, so that they could spy on what was going on here in Villa Diodati.
He came here very much to kind of escape that and to really concentrate on his work. You know, he had no choice but to leave London at that time.
And it followed.
And yet it followed in this figure of Claire, and I think she was a woman who knew what she wanted, and she wanted Byron.
One of Byron's most persistent groupies, Claire Claremont, who was a bit of a bunny boiler, joined him with the Shelleys at Villa Diodati. Byron had received a stream of florid correspondence from Claire since his heyday in London. The fact that Claire had already had an affair with Shelley and that she was Mary's stepsister added extra heat to an already spicy mix.
Her letter's actually really similar to the hundreds of other letters that he received, although significantly bolder, as you'll see. You know, she really kind of pushes for a meeting in a way that the other fans don't quite so much. She writes, "An utter stranger takes the liberty of addressing you. It is earnestly requested that for one moment you pardon the intrusion, and laying aside every remembrance of who and what you are, listen with a friendly ear. It is not charity I demand, for of that I stand in no need. If you feel your indignation rising,
let me look at
if you feel...
Where is it? Oh. If a woman whose reputation has yet remained unstained, if without either guardian or husband to control, she should throw herself upon your mercy, if with a beating heart she should confess the love she has borne you many years, could you betray her? Do not decide hastily, and yet I must entreat your answer without delay." God, she is very, very pushy.
They felt they had some kind of connection to him, and that his
That's the extraordinary thing. They felt they had a connection. People read these poems just like you buy, you know, a U2 album, and you feel this connection with the writer. That it's a sexual, emotional connection. That you're the woman for them, and then we get people like Claire Claremont arriving on the scene.
With all the possibilities posed by this kinky little foursome, it's a wonder they had time for anything but shagging. But ideas and stories exploded within the walls of this villa like the most multiple of orgasms. Byron encouraged the others to dream and write ghost stories, leading Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein, and even Byron's personal physician wrote the influential novel The Vampire. And for Byron, the idea of poetry as an important force for change was reignited by Shelley.
Do you think he was in love with Byron?
I think that is going a little bit too far, but they definitely had the biggest friendship crush on each other. I mean, it's interesting that it was like this.
Do you think they had orgies together, like people said?
I don't think so. I mean, Byron denies it. They all, you know, the thing that I love with Byron's denial of it is that he says it wasn't a league of incest. They weren't actually sisters. They were stepsisters.
Oh, right.
So he doesn't actually really get to the point.
Many may have been titillated by the idea of a league of incest up at the villa, put about by one of Byron's enemies, but I think others must have just envied them. They lived outside the law, outside the rules of a strict society.
Okay, now we're going to pretend that there were English tourists in 1816 staying at the Hotel Angleterre over there.
Okay.
The proprietor's given us a pair of binoculars to look over there at Villa Diodati.
To try and see some shagging.
See if there's some group shagging going on.
Excellent.
So we look at... Oh, great Scott! Marigold, don't look! Byron is shagging Shelley, Mary is licking Claire. Oh, what? No, couldn't be. Have a look, my dear.
Oh, well. What can
Sorry, what? Let me hear.
I can't help but feel that with...
I can't help but feel either, darling.
With 19th century binoculars...
You couldn't have seen very much.
Couldn't have seen very much.
Well, it must have been really fun if you were an English tourist, seeing if you could get a glimpse of it.
What all the scandal hunters didn't know was that Claire Claremont was carrying what Byron called my little illegitimate. But this apparently shameful fact didn't seem to worry the free-loving circle of the Shelleys.
It was an enchanted summer. And I think Shelley's friendship had a soothing effect on Byron. He changed, deepened, as they spent their days exploring and boating, visiting places like this, the Chateau de Chillon.
The prospect of Byron ever returning to England from exile was slight. Perhaps for this reason he became obsessed with the story of one man who had been held here as a prisoner, the libertarian Francois Bonnivard.
A man who was holed up in a dungeon for 3 years. This absolutely tickled Byron's sense of himself. Byron was always the centre of any drama, even if it was a drama about someone else.
In one version of the 16th century story, Bon Iver and his two brothers are chained together to the walls of the dungeon. Both Shelley and Byron really got off on the grimy details of these stories.
These pillars, you still see the rings.
The castle's curator, Mercedes Guillaume, is showing me the very spot that inspired Byron's popular poem, The Prisoner of Chillon.
He turns the story of Bon Iver into really a story about himself and Shelley, kind of strapped to leg irons, both of them lashed to a wall, being beaten and whipped and everything like that. And it's almost homoerotic, I find, the whole thing. But, you know, that's just me. Where's their signatures? Where is Shelley's?
Just here.
There it is, look.
You miss the S.
There's the S, just, you can see it. Where's Byron?
On this pillar you can read his name. Actually, in the prison you read it several times. So most probably it is one of his admirers. Many English young ladies came with a book open in their hands to walk around the pillars, reading the poem, as the prisoner did.
Really? Wow. Here we have Lord Byron's kind of acid trip Broadway musical version of the incarceration of the 16th century freedom fighter, Francois Bon Iver. My hair is grey, but not with years, nor grew it white in a single night, as men's have grown from sudden fears. At last, men came to set me free. I asked not why, and recked not where. It was at length the same to me, fettered or fetterless to be. I learned to love despair. With spiders I had friendship made, and watched them in their sullen trade. Had seen the mice by moonlight play. And why should I feel less than they? My very chains and I grew friends. So much a long communion tends to make us what we are. Even I regained my freedom with a sigh.
With the pregnant Claire Clairmont and the Shelleys returning to England, Byron was once again a free agent. And he was soon to discover that too much freedom can be dangerous. Byron was now headed to a country where the attitudes to life, literature and love were so very different from the constraints of English morality and Swiss seclusion, and plunged right into Milan's high society. Byron's beloved Napoleon was in exile and Italy was in flux. Milan was now under Austrian rule, filled with spies, intrigue and revolutionaries. Byron soaked up the febrile atmosphere.
All the world's a stage. And Byron's life was an opera set upon it.
As soon as he arrived, he took a box at La Scala, where everyone went to see and be seen.
Maybe people didn't know who Byron was when he first arrived, but the opera was the place where you made yourself known. The whole of society would be here on a regular basis, and it only took one person to say, "Oh, questo è Lord Byron, molto difficile, no, 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 no." And they'd have all done that, and then they'd have all known about the scandal, the incest, everything. And the point was, though, they weren't so easily shocked by things. They let people, you know, kind of do what they liked. And he remarks himself that he was introduced to a man who someone said, "Oh, this man prefers men." And the only reaction from society was, "Oh, what a shame for the women." And so I think he must have known as soon as he got to Milan this was kind of a great country for him to be in.
For the cream of Italian society, Byron's scandalous reputation wasn't the handicap it had been in England. They all wanted him, and Byron lapped it up, charming the Donatella Versaces of his day.
What I can say is he wasn't a minimalist at all.
No, not at all.
It was extraordinary. Also the way he looked physically, it was no handsome, according to who we consider handsome today. No. But then, it was considered very handsome.
You know, when you think that a lot of people had smallpox, a lot of people didn't have teeth, a lot of people had funny bones, so good-looking then was someone who had decent skin and some teeth already. And so our standards have become so high,
very high.
It's quite...
We to have everything perfect. Can you imagine at that time already thinking about dieting and the perfect silhouette body?
Well, that's a funny thing, because sometimes when you read things, it's like reading about things today. He loved, for example, some of his best friends were older women, but they did things like enemas and stuff like that. Anyway, that's another story. Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi. Very well, how are you?
Italy really was the great escape for Byron.
The dinner is served.
These flamboyant, tolerant and operatic people allowed him to be himself. And he left his mark here. Donatella and her daughter Allegra and their friends from the world of fashion are all familiar with his reputation.
By the time it comes here, it's just an interesting parallel in a way, because here in a way is one of the centres of image making, and you're all involved in the making of people's images. And he was so ahead of his time for that kind of thing, about building image and being a star. Everything he did was star-like. You know how stars are really only friends with their hairdressers?
Yes. Makeup artists and hairdressers, that's...
No, because you know in the end who's the important person around you.
Yeah.
And he was like that. He had this circus group of a gondolier and, you know, his valet. And they were...
These were his
He just had his entourage, and he was so like the first star.
You know, like, because he had all these relationships, how maybe perhaps we thought it's because in the end he didn't really love himself, so he was looking for other people to love him.
But that's another thing, that he's very ahead of his time, because this is a time before Freud. No one would understand that if you said to someone in 1816, do you hate yourself? Yeah. They just think it was very peculiar. And that's another very star-like thing. I think to be a star, you have to have equal dose of hating yourself and loving the idea of yourself.
Yes.
And that's why stars mostly today are so fucked up. Don't you think, in a way?
I love myself.
You love, yes.
How they were the women with whom he was relating?
The first one that really got him into trouble was this woman called Lady Caroline Lamb.
Yeah.
She was like a dangerous woman, because once he rejected her, she went mad. And she had this fabulous scene once where she went to a party and she took a champagne glass and she cut her wrists, and the party said, "Okay, what do you want me to do now?"
Oh, that's so glamorous.
Fantastic. But in those days, in England, it was like the biggest. Everyone just stopped dead in their tracks.
If Lord Byron was alive today, you think you go to a psychiatrist, the analysis, he'll be...
I'm not sure, because I think the thing about him also, he didn't care really what anyone else thought about him. And I think the idea of sitting in some psychiatrist's office and the psychiatrist saying, "Did your mother, you know," I don't know what they say, psychiatrists. I think he'd have got cross with the psychiatrist. I think psychiatrists are useless, though.
Oh.
They never do anything, they just sit and listen. Anyway, if you're famous, doing interviews is just like...
he's a psychiatrist.
It's like being a psychiatrist, just say what you want. And then after the interviews, don't you find sometimes you do an interview thinking, "Oh my God, I really learned something about myself doing that." And
In Milan, Byron was carnally restrained, but like some great sexual athlete, he was merely pacing himself for his next city, Venice, where he would put in the groundwork for his next great poem, Don Juan, not least by seducing over 200 women. Byron had arrived in the city he was made for, Venice. In this place of masked balls and clandestine trysts in gondolas, Byron not only let his loins run wild, but also his creative genius. His stay in Venice was to inspire another epic poetic work, the scandalous masterpiece, Don Juan. As Byron had his guide, gondolier and possible lover Tito, I have my good friend Robin and her little pink boat.
Can I bring you on board?
Of course. You can bring anything you like.
I imagine Byron stalking in his gondola. He said everybody, rich, poor, young, old, they all loved sex in Venice when he was here. So there must have been like this...
And you think it's different now?
Is it the same now?
No, it's all anybody's interested in here.
Really, sex?
Really, yeah. They like other things. They like going out on the boat. They like their food. They love drinking.
Right.
They love drinking. They're the only Italians that drink, and they drink a lot.
And Byron drank quite a lot while he was here too.
As Robin says, Everyone watches each other here. It's a sport. It always has been. Soon Byron became a recognizable presence, lurking in the misty alleyways.
Byron in the mist, yes, of course. Eyes glowing with sexual desire, cock dripping with gonorrhea, looking for the next moment of redemption through the misty canals, tendrils of smoky mist.
And Tito is there, always taking
Tito
care of him.
singing,
And I think that Byron wanted to get away from all the attention he was getting in England, which was really negative.
and getting a lot of good attention
but
here.
he also didn't want to be ignored, because the thing is that it's very easy to go from one extreme to the other, from the sense of being hounded to the sense of disappearing, and one is worse than the other.
No, he really found his picture frame here. I mean, he just, like, his image, I think, was completed in a way by Venice. I remember actually sitting on the Lido a couple of summers ago with a very grand kind of group and mentioning your name. And one woman said, "Oh, yes, my husband has been having an affair with her for a long time. Please tell her to come." And I thought, this is the ultimate in chic. No names mentioned.
No names mentioned, okay. Well, not many people work here.
Oh, yes, actually. Robin. Yes, my husband has been having an affair with her for 2 years, I think. Isn't that so, darling? Oh, yes, my dear, of course. We all know Robin, right? Everyone's all, see? I mean, in Byron's time, he said everybody enjoyed the pursuit of sex here. And I guess that hasn't changed, really.
Not really, no. Not as far as I've noticed.
For Byron, Venice was a cheap place to live. He could and did have anything he wanted, from an odd menagerie of servants to the wife of his first landlord. But this wasn't just a voyage of excess, it was an exercise in freedom. And perhaps it was one way for him to vent his anger against what he called the cant political, cant poetical, and cant moral of the English and European worlds. And as ever, his life's experience was the raw material for his poetry, with his hero Don Juan fighting and shagging his way across the globe, apparently leaving his female conquests in ecstasy.
She dreamed of being alone on the seashore, chained to a rock she knew not how, but stir she could not from the spot. And the loud roar grew, and each wave rose roughly, threatening her, and o'er her upper lip they seemed to pour until she sobbed for breath. The dream changed, and in a cave she stood. Walls were hung with marble icicles. Those are pubes, I expect. She's now inside her own pussy. Basically, what's happening here, they've been having sex, they had a siesta, he started fucking her during the siesta while she was asleep. She dreams that, first of all, she's chained to a rock in a sea and the waves are crashing against her. Then she's suddenly inside her own vagina. This is all incredibly post-Freudian, which has icicles of marble all the way around. He has an orgasm, which are these dripping things that turn to marble. Then she wakes up to see him lifeless at her feet. So, you know, it's good pot-boiling dynasty stuff. This could be Joan Collins and Crystal Carrington.
Venice was a diseased, indebted, collapsed world, betrayed by Napoleon and sacrificed to the stranglehold of the Austrian Empire. Its glorious days were well behind it, and like Byron, it would never be the same again.
The city was a hotbed of subterfuge and decadence. Secret assignations, long nights roaming the canals. Byron fitted right in, a bejeweled rock star with his own costumed gondolier. 2 barmaid girlfriends, shoals of anonymous masked sex partners, secret assignations in curtained gondolas against the walls of darkened courtyards, in derelict marble hallways. Byron and Venice, for me, is the ultimate romantic image.
By his evocative writings about Venice and the exoticism of his presence, he revived an interest in its strange glamour. Byron the Wanderer thought he had found a sort of peace here. As he wrote, "The city is decaying daily, however, here do I propose to reside for the remainder of my life." With his ancestral home Newstead Abbey at last sold, in May 1818 he took a lease on the Palazzo Mocenigo, a vast pile in prime position on the Grand Canal. His entourage was growing, and with 14 servants and a menagerie of animals, including 2 charming monkeys, Lord Byron moved in.
Oh, God, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Well, now I can show you the balcony.
It's freezing cold.
Yes, it's so humid.
God, this is the most amazing spot.
Yes, but the most incredible thing is that he had rented the whole of the palazzo, so he had both balconies.
So the other apartment too,
yeah.
The whole thing?
I don't know what he did with it, but anyhow.
Well, he had quite a big entourage of staff, but I suppose they lived upstairs, did they?
Yeah, generally, yes. So this is his studio, and there's this famous, well-known print.
But this was Byron's, this was where he worked?
Well, apparently, this is where he worked. I went through all his letters to Murray, and there's no evidence of where he slept. With whom, yes.
Yes, but not where.
but certainly not where. So I don't know in such a big house where his bedroom was. I haven't the faintest idea.
Byron had an extraordinary energy in everything he did. He claimed to have slept with 200 women in his 3 years in Venice. One evening he fell drunk into the canal while trying to seduce a young girl, and then, dripping wet, pulled himself out and had her on the balcony. But he always had a tendency to self-destruction.
Shelley, after visiting Byron in Venice, wrote that Byron associated with wretches who seem almost to have lost the gait and physiognomy of man. Then he wrote that he was familiar with the lowest sort of woman, the people his gondoliers pick up in the street. He allows fathers and mothers to barter with him for their daughters. I think he was like a pig, probably, by the end of it. But I think it served a purpose for him. There was a sense of trying to shatter his very Scottish, Calvinistic foundation stones of his life, and a need to, on the one hand, prove himself to be, you know, a fine, fantastically, you know, aristocratic matinee idol, but on the other hand, to destroy himself. And, you know, this is humanity's endless dilemma, encapsulated in Byron in a very kind of cartoon-like way.
All of life was art to Byron. A visit to this anatomical museum with its preserved distortions of the human form was a bit off the beaten track for most travellers, but he found it fascinating. That he had gonorrhea is without doubt, but the fact that he wrote about syphilis in Don Juan suggests to me that he too might have been a sufferer.
And here's the spotted dick, the syphilis.
Yes, this is a secondary syphilis. It's the,
secondary syphilis.
The eruption affects all the parts of the body anyway.
There's a character in Byron's story called Kinnaird who wrote to Byron saying that he must take out all references to syphilis in his poem Don Juan. And I often wonder if Byron himself had syphilis, because he had all these fits and became gradually more and more insane during his life.
Byron's fight with his publisher and others for the inclusion of references to syphilis in Don Juan was perhaps a bit of pioneering to banish the taboo of sexual diseases.
God, I'm doing this on camera.
And in the same spirit, I've decided to visit the local VD clinic.
Now, this, you take the penis and so on.
Today, it's all over relatively quickly. In Byron's day, things weren't quite so simple.
What I do for television, eh? Do you know about gonorrhea in the 19th century?
Yeah, it's a common disease. There was a therapy for this.
So you just had it forever?
Yeah.
But syphilis, on the other hand, did the mercury work? Was it a proper cure? Mercuria era una cura efficace?
Poco efficace.
It's strange because sex is always, you know, it's the thing everyone wants most, but it's a killer. It's always been a killer, it seems to me. Anyway, thank you very much.
But perhaps even for Byron, the relentless hedonism was in the end too much. One of his most touching poems indicates a distinct change of pace. So we'll go no more a roving, so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving, and the moon be still as bright. For the sword outwears its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. He does truly seem to have given up on roving. He rediscovered politics and settled into a particular sort of domestic entente with a married woman, Teresa Guiccioli. Their affair in Venice was more than the usual Byron fling, and too flagrant even for a Venetian husband.
Where shall I park my horse? So, Teresa was sent here by her husband.
She was sent here by a very angry husband who got fed up with a very young and beautiful wife, flirting around Venice with Byron. And in fact, he sends her down to Kadzan, and she comes here and she sulks.
Basically.
Maria Adelaida Vanzo's family have lived in this house since the Guicciolis left.
What's your take on the Teresa-Byron relationship then?
Well, my take is that, I mean, she couldn't have possibly, in the beginning, have said no to such an opportunity, because he was the symbol of romantic love, which was obviously the total fashion in that epoch. And I think in the beginning she is totally infatuated with him, and then love for a while, passionate love.
Well, they had sex for 4 whole days, and he writes a letter to her. These corridors make me think of, about reminding her how they've been having sex in the corridors and how exciting it was in corridors against walls, nearly being discovered by the staff. It's a difficult relationship to get a grip on.
Yes.
And my feeling is that he was so into his own image, and also he just turned 30 and he was having a kind of midlife crisis. He thought he couldn't go on having these, terrible sexual antics, waking up with kind of half-dead syphilitic whores or with one leg. And so, like, in that typical kind of male midlife crisis thing, you think you can resolve everything with a relationship. And so he kind of plunged into this relationship with a girl who was really, I don't think, at all suited to him.
Some people have brought it up to the stars, some people have made it into a terribly low relationship, but in fact it was simply love between a poet and a beautiful girl who had a very strong practical sense. I agree with you there. And at the end, that practical sense is really what remains, because he goes off to Greece because he's terrified of being caught, and she remains. She cries a bit, and then she gets on with her life.
He now had his final epiphany. The one relationship that mattered most to Byron came to a sudden, tragic end. The Shelleys had joined him in Italy. Then Shelley drowned in a storm at sea. Byron took part in the cremation of his body on the beach at Viareggio. In Shelley's death, Byron's life took a new turn. And he determined that, like Don Juan, he would take up arms and make the world a better place. And of course, he would do so in a uniquely Byronic way.
Byron must have looked into these flames and thought, how can I trump this?
On his first great foreign adventure in 1809, Byron had paid homage to the great classical culture whose literature and civilization he'd so admired since school days. His admiration for all things Greek had left a lasting impression. And now, 14 years later, he was determined to support his beloved Greeks in their fight for freedom from the Ottoman Empire.
Excuse me, I'm looking for some military costumes.
Resolving to join the Greek independence fighters, he decided to raise an army, but in a very Byronic way.
I'm looking for hats that Lord Byron might have worn.
In the later parts of Byron's epic poem, Don Juan becomes a soldier, and Byron was now determined to imitate his own creation. He decided to fit out himself and his motley band of friends, servants, and distant relations in appropriately stylish military uniform, and went to an operatic costume designer in Geneva to do so.
In the back of his mind already is the legendary idea of Byron's brigade. freeing Greece from the clutches of the Ottoman Empire. A kind of power-hungry, syphilitic dream. I mean, that's what syphilis is like. It gives delusions of grandeur. And I sometimes wonder if he is, at this stage, syphilitic. It's such a crazy thing to be doing. I think he is seriously at the end of the road here, trying on, you know, costumes with epaulettes to make him feel like the person he should be. I mean, he really is an actor. I mean, so it's quite ironic that he ends up in a theatrical costumiers, you know, choosing his outfit for the next act, for the grand climax of this extraordinary life.
Inspired by Napoleon, emulating Don Juan, flattered that he might be king, the lame boy had been transformed into a revolutionary hero. Sailing on his final adventure, Byron fantasized about a Greek republic with himself as leader, a nation in his own image, one to which he could finally belong.
Byron was heading for here to take part in the war between Greece and Turkey. He'd been sent by the London Greek Committee, who had promised a large amount of money, £800,000, which in those days was a lot, and he was basically coming to administrate it. Actually, they'd pulled the wool over his eyes slightly. He was really there just as a kind of piece of ornamentation. He, of course, wanted one last adventure / death scene with which to propel himself into posterity.
Byron had hired a boy called Lucas to join the military enterprise, and reverting to his youthful interests, he fell in love with him. But by now, Byron had lost his luster, and Lucas was utterly indifferent.
Come on.
And it wasn't just on the personal side that Byron's aspirations were being confounded. He arrived at Missolonghi to find a degree of chaos, with various factions trying to make use of him and his fame. Byron protested that he didn't want to join a faction, but a nation. The Greeks still celebrate his support for their national cause, just this year naming an annual Byron Day. But for Byron himself, it was hardly heroic.
In many senses, the nearer he got to Missolonghi, the more he wanted to go back, but he couldn't let himself. Vanity, pride, this idea of his own posterity, I think was always in the back of his mind. And he had no way out. He was in a trap.
Surrounded by disappointments and already in bad health, Byron went riding in a downpour through the malarial swamp of Missolonghi. He caught a fever and never recovered.
So, Byron died here, on the edge of a swamp, at the fringes of the fray, his usual position, holding the hand of his Venetian gondolier. Wobbly-toothed, overweight, balding, no longer mad, bad and dangerous to know, just mad, perhaps, to even be here in the first place. Hopelessly in love with an arrogant boy, disillusioned with his brothers-in-arms, far away from all the friends so studiously shunned over the years, but who he missed nonetheless. Byron's death was 1,000,000 miles away from history's portrait that he so earnestly helped to construct. The final glaze was painted with his own blood.
At the age of 36, the shooting star had shot. Byron's body was embalmed in a vat of brandy and began the arduous journey back to his ancestral home in Nottinghamshire. Finally, I returned to his hometown after following Byron on the extraordinary adventures that took him abroad for half his adult life. He's still a hero to the Greeks, the Albanians and others. But what does he mean to us today?
Good evening, welcome to the Byron. If you'd like to get that 8-page marathon book ready,
Just down the road from his ancestral home, I find the name of Byron is still alive. He championed the rights of these people's ancestors, the weavers of Nottingham, in his maiden speech in the House of Lords.
262.
Oh, I saw 62 somewhere.
3 and 9, 39.
Do you any of you ladies know much about Byron, for example? I mean, does everyone here know things about him? Or?
I don't know a lot. I only know he was a poet and he was a bit of a lad.
This one knows he was a sex maniac.
Well, she would. He was
She
a
would.
generation.
You know, like in 1933, two vicars opened up the crypt. He was perfectly preserved. But the second thing was he had a gigantic erection.
Well, that's about right for Byron.
Yeah.
Loads of sex, didn't he?
That's the weird thing. He had a tiny foot and a huge cock. Very difficult to live with, those two. That.
Nature equates.
I know, exactly. Nature equates.
You wish you had a little foot.
No, I wish I had a big cock.
Well, you dirty bugger! You dirty old bugger! So, I can't believe you said that. What? What you just said? I can't believe you said that either. What, that he wished he had a big cock? I never said that. Well, he can dream, can't he? He's only imagining what he'd love to have. He wants to wrap it round his waist twice and then tuck it in his trousers.
Ladies, shall we go on with the bingo now?
I think we know something about Byron.
Who was he really? A cripple? A queer? An aristocrat? Revolutionary? Crippled certainly by shyness when it suited him, impossibly arrogant in the next breath, brilliantly inconsistent. He was loved and hated with equal fervour.
The vast, epic nature of Byron's story can make him remote. But for me, it's his inglorious death and the ultimate failures in his life that make him touching and touchable. And it's for those frailties that I love him.
Narrowing the gap between rich and poor when a wealthy family offers a lifeline to a family on the poverty line. How the Other Half Live, Thursday at 9. Next tonight, dirty housemates wrapped in cling film and writhing on the ground. It could only be Big Brother.